120,000 people in the US alone die each year due to work-related stress. Nobody should be sick and nobody should for sure die because they need to provide for themselves and their families. So my goal eventually is to harness AI not only to show what could be the problem in the next quarter, but also to help mitigate and help managers better manage or better lead.
Welcome to the Optimized Workplace. On today's call, we're welcoming Eitan Vesely, founder and CEO of Watercooler AI. Eitan made his mark in the field of artificial intelligence with his first startup in 2014, where he worked as a senior director of AI strategy and innovation. In 2022, Eitan founded a people's analytics startup called Watercooler AI, in which he works with Simon Sinek, as well as other founders, using AI to detect employee vulnerabilities around burnout and risk. So, Eitan, welcome to the show. And as we welcome you, can you tell us what are some of the telltale signs of burnout in the workplace, and how are you seeing AI shaping a solution around this challenge?
First of all, thank you, Fran, for having me on the podcast and interviewing me. I think just before I dive into the details, one step back. Why, as Simon likes to say, right? We'll start with the why. And why have we started Watercooler to begin with? So I'll do it short. The year is 2019 or 2020. I'm post the acquisition of my previous startup, making my first moves as a senior director in a multinational corporate. One of my responsibilities was sales and marketing of specific AI products, and I had a global team. It's pandemic time. And I was amazed that at one point, where the time comes of the year, I was being pushed and asked frequently by my HR business partners to make sure that my team answers the annual employee survey. Right? And I was like, you just acquired an AI company that was my previous company. How come you're asking me to answer a survey once a year for me as a leader to have better understanding of how my people are doing? Maybe they're burned out already. Maybe the pandemic is hitting them hard. Now as a leader, I'm discussing and speaking with them, but only once a year to get an overall view. And also based on people's answers, which we know tend to be biased and, subject to cognitive biases. So long story short, I was looking for something much more real-time, much more data-driven, something that I can have at the palm of my hand or on my laptop every day of the week. Struggling to find one, I started Watercooler about a year and a half ago, and here we are today. Back to your question then about burnout. I think burnout, we have a bunch of different proxies that are quite nicely and accurately are able to predict or detect and predict those pockets of potential burnout in the organization. Basically, I'm going to get a bit technical. The magic, so to speak, of AI, because it's not magic, the ability of AI is to look at tons of data sources and look at millions and way more than that data points and start searching for those patterns that are oftentimes, they go unnoticed, especially if you don't look at the data or don't even collect the data. So speaking of burnout, and we look at about 200, 300 different parameters working with our customers. Mm-hmm. Think about the workload as it is reflected in the engagement with different IT systems, right? What time of the day are people starting to be active? What times of the day do they end their activity online, right? And put it on a team's level, on a division level, on a business unit level, right? So we have a good statistical amount, I would say. So speaking of burnout, you see an increase in workload. You see people starting to be way more active than before, overnight, over weekend. You see that their manager or leader is a bit disengaging from them. So the communication kind of fades away a bit. Mm-hmm. You see that it's very different than the history of that specific team, and it's very different than other comparable teams. So the AI term would be anomaly detection. We're able to detect these anomalies, find those areas in the business that the people performance behavior is different. Last point on that, Fran. It's important to note that AI can detect the patterns in the data It's a different story concluding if it's good or bad, if it's something that I want to cultivate or I don't want to have in my company at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that because with all the advances in AI, and doing AI for over a decade now, I strongly believe that it's eventually up to us people and human beings. AI can help, can support, cannot replace.
Okay. So that was fantastic. You gave us the 80,000 foot view. So I want you to kind of bring it down to layman's terms because you are a technician. And so you understand, you know how to tinker underneath the hood and understand the complexities of it. But let's face it, most of the people who are starting to tinker with AI now that is brought out into the populace are not the technicians, right? They're not the engineers. So if I'm sitting in my office and I'm managing a team of 5 or 50 or 500, and I'm thinking about, okay, so I know a little bit, enough to probably get myself in trouble when it comes to ChatGPT or generative AI, or, even using my company's own AI specific platform. How in the world am I actually going to be able to use something like this to mitigate stress or to mitigate, mental, challenges my employees are having? Distill it down for us if you can in a very layman's term so people can kind of put their head around that.
So again, with your permission, before addressing and answering that specific question, I want to go a step back again. I'm doing AI for a decade. I'm a strong advocate for AI. I think it's transforming the world. It's quite obvious. But with that, there's a lot of hype, and people who do not really understand are sucked away into this push from the market to adopt AI and do generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference, by the way, between generative AI, Midjourney, the image generator or ChatGPT, and the classical AI. The classical or the old-fashioned was top of the state of the art a couple of years ago until generative came out, right?
Yeah.
So I strongly advise not to be captured by the buzz in the market and the hype. Sometimes it could overshadow or it can shadow the actual value of what you need. And to my customers, those that I work with, I tell them, look, why do you care if you get those results and insights with AI or with something that has nothing to do with AI? Focus on the value, not on the technology that's underlying, the underlying technology.
Good point.
For the explanation, we in at least from the water cooler solution side, as I've mentioned, we're able to detect abnormal patterns, which means that I'm a sales and marketing manager, right? That's as an example. I have 8 different teams spread around the globe, or let's say that most of them in the US.
Mm-hmm.
The AI will replace, or not replace, but will enhance my ability to see how are my people doing based on their digital footprint.
How?
Okay. How? Let's start with some examples. As mentioned, we have about 200, 300 different data points, starting with age, tenure, right? Adjacent departures that happen close by in my proximity, managerial changes, vacation days utilized, sick leaves, promotions surround me. Combine that with meeting habits, type of communication or network that I have within the organization, within my team. Is it evolving over time or is it decreasing over time that I could be disengaged from my team?
So, okay, so let me just ask you one question as you're explaining this. So are you saying then that people do you have these data points that are already saying, as an employer, I have these data points already sitting in some sort of data set somewhere in the organization based on benefits, based on employment records versus having to actually go out and assess people for these different things?
The data is there. Everything that we work with,
yes,
you'll be surprised, but it's there. It's stored for years.
Okay.
So when we come in, we have, or the AI engine has a lot of data to learn from. And this is, again, the power of AI. It adapts per organization, per division, per team. It will learn the specific behavioral patterns identified in that team.
I immediately have a question that I know my client would ask. So how do they, if they want to solution something like this, how do they get their data ready to work with you? Or is that something that you would do for them? Because again, there's a lot of talk around being data ready in order for the AI to read it properly and to give you the right outputs that you're looking for.
Correct. And we start working with customers at around 500 employees, north of 500 employees, because we do need to rely on a certain amount of data. It might not be the best quality of data, but at least a certain quantity that we can work with.
Mm-hmm.
We normally start by integrating to several data sources: HRIS, applicant tracking system, performance engagement, survey data, payroll if customers wish to include, pay equity or payroll data.
Okay.
Those who are interested, we can also add data from other IT systems like email usage patterns or calendar usage patterns or CRM usage patterns, focusing on usage patterns only, of course, not looking into content of any. So the first thing we do after integration is we stop for a second and we come back with a data readiness audit report to the customer. So they themselves, they learn about the gaps and the problems that they have with the data.
Excellent. If you are enjoying this segment or any of the segments that you've heard thus far on the Optimized Workplace, please be sure to join us here below and just follow us on the Optimized Workplace. We really want to not only drive our viewers and listeners, but we also want to share it. So if there's others that you know, like us, please here, join and listen, subscribe on a regular basis, but also share the podcast. We'd love to have you back. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, because if you are a prudent employer of any type, you can't help but think immediately about the liability, right? Or the legality or misconceptions around that. So what are there, if there are any, what are the legal issues that might surround this, especially when you start talking about HR? So anything that affects the employee and personal data information that an organization would have to be thinking about. What are the legal implications of that and how do they mitigate those?
Of course. So it's a very good question. And there's a lot of legislation and regulation that is popping up every few weeks in different regions. I'm not that familiar, by the way, with that, because our solution does not make any decisions, right? We leave all the decisions to the people. And this is one of the things to consider. If you have, for example, different solutions or screening resumes or CVs, right, scoring them, then regulation like the automated employee decision tools in the New York area or the European Act that is now getting published, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So there are certain solutions that are regarded as being a high risk to discriminate populations, and these have to undergo through some bias audits and get those compliance certifications that their solution does not do what we don't want it to do. In our case, and that's deliberately without even being aware of the legislation and regulation, as a way of thinking, our AI doesn't make any decision. In a way, if you would have the time to go into all the different systems that we integrate with, to pull the reports manually and to analyze them yourself, you could have done that in a way. So that's, I think, the biggest point, or one of the important points is the AI scoring and making decisions, or is it not?
I think that's a powerful point, because again, it's just being able to access your data and know what it's saying.
Exactly.
It's a diagnostic, really. You have to make the decision. To me, an easy analogy is that I drive a Tesla. It's an EV. I'm getting ready to come in for a checkup. And, the mechanic is going to come next week and tell me what's going on with the car. I get to decide, am I going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to fix this issue? I mean, the car is running, but if I wanted to run better, if I wanted to be better performing, then the data is going to be read. He's going to tell me what's going on with the vehicle, and then I've got to make a decision. So I think that's a powerful point that you're making. You already have it at your disposal, but you're not reading that data, and that data could have huge implications for your organization. it's up to you to decide what you do with it. So I think that's fantastic. So as we shift, I can already see that we're probably going to need to have a part 2 to this, because there's so many other pieces. And I can already imagine clients of ours having some questions for you. I'm so curious, what are you, when you think about where AI was, as you said, just 12 months ago, and now we're seeing with generative AI, and particularly thinking about the workplace landscape, we're dealing with some major issues. A lot of my previous guests I just had on, we were talking about the built environment and how we make the built environment better to make people thrive. But the built environment needs to be better because we're dealing with return to work and the future of work and what people want to do, and the hybrid distributed workforce, and if we go back into another virus situation, what does that mean on top of all the issues we were dealing with before COVID, right? Burnout, stress, lack of resiliency. Now we're going into a mental health crisis because there's so many people dealing with mental health issues. With all of those layers, what are you most excited about with regards to not just your product, but this industry of what generative AI will be able to do to affect the workplace for the future?
I can easily tell you what made me open up Watercooler and do what I do today. And I go back to what Simon says, start with why. I remember researching the market, trying to magnify or to find the pain or the impact that we want to make. And I came across an interesting statistical point, that about 120,000 people in the US alone die each year due to work-related stress. And I was so much affected by it because nobody should be sick and nobody should for sure die because they want to provide for themselves and their families.
Yeah.
I myself, in my entrepreneurial journey, started a decade ago. I ended up in the hospital twice due to work-related stress. So my goal eventually, the vision, the just cause, is to utilize or harness AI, not only to show what could be the problem in the next quarter or two. Here you have excessive burnout. These people are not taking any vacation days, but also to help mitigate and help managers better manage or better lead their people. And I can give you a very easy example from, again, my own experience, right? My previous company, my previous startup, we were about 30 people just before the acquisition. And I remember a bunch of cases that mid-level managers would come to me for advice, right? For help with their people. And often I remember myself ending with something like, you know what? I have recently watched Simon Sinek as an example, because that's truly the case. 5-minute video speaking exactly about the problem that you just brought into my office. Let me share it with you and we talk after it. Long story short, I've done it a bunch of times, and I've seen and I've heard people speak about it at lunch, and I've seen how it changes the company, the culture.
Okay.
Now take that with AI and put it on a much larger scale. What if we now know the specific points that every leader should improve just a bit in? How about we take that annual leadership training, which is important, but instead of doing it once a year, 3 days offsite in a nice hotel, let's do it every week with a very customized, personalized, targeted piece of advice or piece of training, because every leader needs something else. Every manager needs something else. Netflix is doing it to all of us, recommending the right content. So why don't we do it to leadership training? So we have the data, we can extract the problems that we see in the data, and we can now close the loop with a recommendation, how to change the behavior. Here is some training that would benefit you much better than other leadership training content.
That is powerful, Eitan.
Yeah.
Preach, preach, preach. Like I need to pick you up, take you out of this computer, walk you over to a client of mine and say, did you listen to what he just said?
So you have it on tape.
I'm so sick of these surveys or these, EAP assessments or these, satisfaction. And they first of all, they do nothing with them because they know it all says the same thing. The data is skewed because it so depends on the day, the time, how you feel about your manager, what's going on. Do you feel the manager's going to be by? It's so skewed. And it's not giving you real time, efficient pulse checking anything. And so quite frankly, they're spending money on it and they're doing nothing about it. And so the retreats are the same. The leadership trainings are the same. Everybody goes to these retreats. They don't get anything out of them. Oh my goodness. Yes, I'm going to pick you up out of this computer, walk you over. That is powerful. That is hugely powerful. I'm so
Thank
curious.
you.
I know my guests are wondering. I'm so curious. Who found who? Did Simon Sinek find you? Did you find him? How did you marry together to create Watercooler AI?
I reached out to him in a cold email, sharing my story. It was a long one, and I got his attention, and one thing led to another, and here we are today.
I love it. Well, this is going to be part one. There will be a part two because there's so many
Pleasure.
more questions to ask. And I know you already told me you've got another call to jump to, as do I. But this has been a phenomenal episode. I've so enjoyed it. You've really scratched the surface of
Yeah.
curiosity for me. So there's so much more to learn. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, and continued success to you.
Thank you very much, Fran, for having me, and hope I was helpful for you and the rest of the audience. And I'm happy to jump on a part two.
Excellent. Thank you again. And thank you all for joining us today for this episode of The Optimized Workplace. Again, I'm your host, Fran Dean Bishop. If you've enjoyed this conversation, there will be another one just like it. Please subscribe and listen to us on your favorite podcast channel. And remember, as I always tell you, it's many, that small, monumental moments that make the biggest shift in your day. Take care and stay well.